I guess we'll just start. Hi, everyone. My name is CJ. I am one of the members of the Syllabi Cohort. I'm a second-year student in a PhD program focusing on African American studies, political theory, and literature in the 19th century. So, yeah. And this is the lovely Morgan.
I'm Morgan, another member of the Syllabi Cohort, taking a gap year before law school and reading fun things along the way. And I'm excited to talk with CJ.
I'm a huge fan of gap years, deferring a year.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess depending on who you ask, but like this seems like the right time, the best time maybe to take a gap year. Just kind of be like, let this breathe a little bit,
Yes,
So yeah. So today we are discussing Parable of the Sower. Even though I've established that the way I was saying it before was incorrect, I still, when you tell yourself that something is wrong, but then every time in your memory it comes up, you can't remember if it's the thing that's wrong or the thing that's right. Am I alone?
What were you saying?
Well, I was saying like Sower, like Parable of the,
okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You have that thought when you're 13 and then it just, it never goes away.
So
but yeah.
I've heard the parable in the Bible for so long. And what you reap is what you sow. So I
guess my heathen colors are showing. I always have to, especially reading 19th century texts, have to keep an eye to that's probably a biblical reference right there. Because I
avoided the book for so long because I was like, I don't know if I want to read this.
Clearly my brain ain't retained any of it because I kind of grew up in the church. My family member was in the church. We'd have church teas and all that stuff. And if it rained outside, they would take us and we would have to read the Bible. I'd be like, yes, it rained, or yes, something happened. We don't have to go. And it'd be like, psych, you got to read this, and this. And there'd be discussion questions kind of like this.
Yep.
So,
Oh, we got somebody asked how many years can I be out of school? We'll still call it a gap. As many years we want to. It can be like a gap, a leap, a jump.
Especially when you go at the graduate level, people. I met someone who came to my department to finish their program, and they've been gone for some years. Clearly, because she was like, this building looks so different. I'm like, different?
My old professor just started at Northwestern in the same program. And she's late 20s. She taught for some time and lived her life and was like, I'm ready to go back. So you can take as long as you want.
Yeah.
It could even benefit you to do it that way sometimes.
Yeah, truly. So yeah, the sections we're doing are chapters 10 through 19.
Mm-hmm.
And in the syllabus, that's split into two sections, 10 and 13, and then 14 through 19. And so for today, we're not so much going to just go through all of the questions, although that oftentimes is really helpful in walking folks through who maybe just started the syllabus, who've just come to this group and want to experience what discussion questions can be. Because it's not necessarily always just directly answering that question, right? Because some of these, especially in these sections, are very if you're reading the book, it's pretty intuitive, right? This thing happened, so this. Mm-hmm. But I think it's still helpful to have those questions available so that they can kind of offer a guide or an outline for how you might make broader connections, right?
Yeah.
So I still think, that activity for us to do together is really generative. But because there's a lot kind of happening, not only in these sections, but also in terms of actual discussion questions, we just wanted to kind of get more closely to the meat and potatoes of it, for the sake of brevity, time, effectiveness of the conversation. I will start off with the quote first identified at chapter 10. Oh, Morgan, did you want to add anything? Sorry, I just
Oh no, go ahead. I'll add in when there's a point I want to make, but not at this moment. So go ahead.
Okay, true. We start chapter 10. So it's a very obvious break in the text, and that the chapters before are, part 1. And so now we're opening up to part 2. And so the year is 2026, and we have another but longer excerpt from Earthseed, the Books of the Living. And so I'll just read that. So it says, civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. It is a means of combining the intelligence of many to achieve ongoing group adaptation. Civilization, like intelligence, may serve well, serve adequately, or fail to serve its adaptive function. When civilization fails to serve, it must disintegrate unless it is acted upon by unifying internal or external forces. So there's a lot happening here. First, I'll say it's sometimes hard to read very much this particular kind of writing. And we talked a little bit about it in the last live discussion. But there is a distinct departure between the core of the text, which is journal entries, and kind of the outline of the text, which is scripture from this faith system, faith society, whatever you want to call it. And so they're very different in not just style, but how they speak, right? And so it's kind of like speaking in platitudes. It's like it's not just enough to say something, but there's an underlying subtext to what's being said, or an underlying motivation of in a regular retelling of life or discussion of fiction. You're just kind of usually stating just observation, and maybe that fuels maybe ideas or thoughts. But if in thinking about civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals, you know that they're trying to expound upon this idea of civilization, that there's a larger agenda to, maybe offer advice or, be critical of civilization or intelligence or what have you. So it's kind of, I feel like, at least for me, it takes kind of a breaking apart, parsing out what's kind of being said here. Did you have any immediate thoughts about this particular?
Yeah, just more so as far as the style of this writing. So I was reading this with a friend who had never read it before, who's not really familiar with this style, as she kept reiterating to me. And she was just saying that with authors like Octavia Butler and Toni Morrison, they write very poetic. So it took a lot for her to kind of parse out the main point of this section. But what we both really came to realize, that last sentence, when civilization fails to serve, it must disintegrate unless it is acted upon by unifying internal and external forces. That really set the pace for me as far as the ominous and very, I would say grief-centered tone that this section of the book started to pull apart. There was a lot of grief and a lot of just sadness in this particular section with the death that happened and the presumed death. So I think that this portion right here, really looking back in hindsight, it kind of set the tone for that.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to think about a lot of the interpersonal tension that happens in the parts that follow. Because I feel like more towards the beginning, the emphasis is like just understanding the nature of the characters. And then I feel like in the chapters that follow, they're more so you get to kind of see the characters in action. And what I mean by that is you get to see, we don't just read about Lauren's hyperempathy. We kind of endure it a little bit more with her and thinking about these kind of more interpersonal turmoils that they're dealing with. And adding that they have more strenuous circumstances. It's like trying to be vague while also hitting on the target of what you're saying, because it's just like, oh, I don't want to technically spoil it, if anyone hasn't read the section yet, but also like try and talk about things. No, you're doing it right. I'm just saying it's like, I'm just like very like cautious about doing that, but it's not reasonable because I think people would click on this if they've read it. But yeah.
Sometimes we have to pop in just for a good chat, though. So,
yeah, that's true. No. I think it's safe to assume that people have read it. I think it's just like in regular life, like you try and like not. Well, some people don't care about spoilers, but like you try not to like spoil something for someone, so you're always just cautious about retelling something. Mm-hmm. But that's just me being weird. But I do think my point, I think, was that despite the fact that it's very much about how are these characters now dealing with this change of circumstances, the focus being on these very two lofty societal ideas, civilization and intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And so in thinking, so in thinking about the readings and the events that we're going to be talking about, do you feel like there's a clear obviousness or a clear connection between civilization and intelligence and what's happening in the parts to follow?
For this section, hold on, let me compartmentalize. Is there a clear connection? No.
Fair. See, for me, I think what I consider when I feel like when people talk about intelligence is kind of like a red flag. Mm-hmm. And especially it being in Congress with civilization, right? I think there's a lot of reservation, from the position of Black people, Black studies, to conflate progress, prosperity, with civilization or intelligence. I think these are very loaded terms, mm-hmm. right? That, in early modern periods, to be critical about, well, what qualifies as a civilization, what qualifies as intelligence, right?
Exactly.
And I think because we're in proximity to this moment, like, it's 2020, she's writing this in, again, 1993. So it's not like a huge leap to say people are still interrogating this question at the time that Octavia Butler projects of being critical with regards to civilization and intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And I think something that's I think there is a criticalness in this mention here, especially to think about the second part where it says civilization like intelligence may serve well, serve adequately, or fail to serve its adaptive function. I think that its attention to its adaptive function emphasizes that civilization does benefit people, not necessarily you, right? Because nowhere in this statement does it say civilization will benefit you. It says civilization broadly, it'll benefit somebody. Like that's kind of like the absent keywords, like
some way.
Right. It may serve you well. It may serve well rather. But it isn't guaranteed to serve you because it has an adaptive function, which is, and we can extrapolate from there, it is to serve, a wealthy minority that possesses the world majority, right? And I think to parallel it with intelligence, right? Because these terms have similar activity in that, or circulation, when we're just talking about how civilization and intelligence kind of get conflated with whiteness. And white progress that is unattainable to, Black people, Black civilizations, to which they would never be called.
I think my confusion or just hesitation with your question is, just the general, I guess, move to associate civilization and intelligence specifically with white standards. Like, what does it mean? What is intelligence? Intelligence on whose terms, by whose standards? And what makes a civilization? All those questions.
I'm sorry. I'm seeing Jules's question. And the answer is we have no idea. I tried playing around with this thing. In case she's not listening, I'll just type it.
She wasn't able to put us next to each other on the
screen. I tried. I did it last time, but I tried pressing the button and it just wouldn't press. So
yeah, I don't even have that function on my side, probably because I didn't, start the live. So
yeah. Yeah, I don't. Oh, now
that's good.
Bigger. Okay. But that's all we tried to. Bam.
Okay.
All right. Yay.
Click. Got it.
All right. Thank you, Julesy, for the support. Okay. So yeah, so thinking about civilization and intelligence both being conflated. And so thinking that and also, because last week we talked a lot about what is the relevance or import in emphasizing a Baptist tradition. Not only that's her family's faith, but it's also a faith that she draws upon while also drawing away from in her pursuit of Earthseed. And so I think that's an example of drawing upon and drawing away from, in that, as you said last week too, when Bree mentioned, is faith, as, and especially a Christian faith as being tied very much to North American abolition, liberation movements, efforts, and not just, and I'll add also not just Christian faith, but also, along the Western Hemisphere, Muslim faith. I'm sure like
monotheistic.
Or even indigenous, faith groups, or belief systems. I think there's a thread there, And I mean, I think a lot of times about the Caribbean and how in the Caribbean, a lot of faith was experienced by using the iconography of Catholicism as a way to kind of as a kind of fugitive resistance of the faith imposed upon them, and so kind of having this dual purpose, right, of seeming to adopt the master's tradition, but then also being able to serve an own secretive network of faith. And all that to say that I think what Brie was saying is just thinking about religion as closely connected to the pursuit of liberation, freedom struggles. Think about the civil rights movement. Think about Black Power movements, and so to think that faith and Black people experiencing scripture is connected to liberation that is tied to a pursuit of white progress, like white education, white, inclusion in broader, governmental representation. And so to speak critically about civilization like intelligence may serve well, again, leaving out the you, right? May serve well, serve adequately, or fail to serve its adaptive function.
This is, I'm working on the syllabus for the next read, the next complex theory read, In Search of Our Mother's Garden. And a lot of what you just said reminds me of some of the sections that Alice Walker had as far as like religion tied to liberation. Because she talks a lot about when she interviews Coretta Scott King, and she talks about like her perception and her encounter with MLK, and then she also has a lot of commentary throughout the book on her relationship to the South, specifically like the Black American South, Black people in Southern spaces. So yeah, that just made me think of that. I think I don't want to go off on a tangent because the read is coming up, but it's I think it's a good, like a good follow-up for this, because it definitely adds, I would say, I don't know, like Parable of the Sower is pretty much nonfiction at this point, but it definitely adds a real world kind of turn or interpretation to Butler.
For sure. I won't hammer too long. As I mentioned in the syllabus, I love a good epigraph. I love a good excerpt. To me, that's my bread and butter, probably because so many scholars I look at use them. Mm-hmm. Even, this is unrelated, but even like Toni Morrison, like she has an essay where she just kind of breaks apart her first line, the first sentence of every book that she writes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not every book, just like a couple of the big ones. I think Sula, Song of Solomon, Beloved. And there's a lot of intention that goes behind the thing that leads the rest of the text, right? Be it the first sentence, the epigraph. So there's a treasure in these epigraphs, I'm telling y'all. So, stay woke. And speaking of long, the one for 10 is also pretty long. And so I think in the previous section, we talked a little bit about Keith. And so is there, I guess I would ask kind of how Keith's relationship to home maybe has evolved, or Lauren's relationship to Keith.
Keith, in this section, this is where, he returns. And I think Lauren was kind of realizing that he had gotten into some shady dealings, I guess you could say. But I think in a way he had found home. He had found a certain peace and a certain I'll just say peace. You say that, child. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Keith was what was what was the sentence? Like she said Lauren said something like Keith lives outside or.
Yeah, so Keith kind of shares his experience being outside the city.
Mm-hmm. And the people that he's with don't know like how old he is. He's like, of course they don't know how old I am. But in a way it's like, you know, he speaks as if he's found his place. He's found his people.
Mm-hmm. And I think age is a huge thing in this text too, right? Because thinking about the benchmark of time of Keith's 13th birthday, but also associating with people who are kind of oblivious to his age, right? As if in the circumstances that they're in, age has no import, has kind of no relevance, right? Mm-hmm. And that, you know, as we talked last week, that kind of flows into Lauren and like our relationship as the readers to Lauren, because we have to frequently remind ourselves, what year is it? When did this thing start? Because Lauren's maybe, you know, she's still really young. And then you kind of feel as though to exceptionalize what she's doing, you know, everything that she's thinking and she's doing. When in reality, she's probably a product of her circumstances, right? Or that, as we discussed last week, potentially everyone else has adapted to something else, right? Again, in the epigraph highlighting, there's an adaptive function. But now
succeeded in, I guess, demonstrating a level of maturity. Tanisha says he feels valuable because he can provide a service, be a man. These people outside need him. And he has a skill.
Yeah. And that transcends the fact that he's still a young child. Lauren's creating a faith system, and she's still young too. And you also have her peers, you know, trying to think of ways to be happy by way of marriage and children, even as Lauren reckons with the idea that that's improbable or delusional. And so I think, I just think it's interesting that we have such clear benchmarks of time, right? Because she's writing in journal entries, you know, each section, she notes the year, but their age, you know, the passing of time is kind of irrelevant to the kind of maturation that they're experiencing at an accelerated pace. And then we also have moments where we get glimpses of the fact that Lauren is still a child, right? Or a little immature.
Yeah.
Or a little unprepared.
How old is she? She's
at this point, math is hard. It's only 2 years after, so she's 16, 17.
Like 20. Yeah, okay.
I could very well be wrong. But that would make sense in that, you know, people are reproducing at that age. You know, it's not, you know, Keith's age. But still, you know.
Keith's age is closer to when, because Keith is 13.
Yeah.
Keith's age is closer to when Lauren has her, is that when she has her sexual debut, I guess, with, what's his name? Ruben? And because I know she tells Keith about it in this section. I think she said something about being 12. That was interesting to me just because that kind of prompted a conversation. Well, not a conversation, but I was just thinking through like religion and sex, you know, those things. Then her being 12, 13 years old and being caught and how that translates to, like you were saying earlier, like a Baptist tradition and then like a Black Southern tradition, just all those different things. Yeah. So that was kind of, their conversation was kind of funny.
For sure. I'm just opening. Tanisha said Lauren was born in 2009. Oh, that math hurts my head. Not because it's hard, but because I'm trying not to conceive of someone being born after 2000. That is just so stressful. Throw it away. But that math still does hurt my head. So she's 16. Well, 15 at the time of start of it, but at this point it's 2026. So
that reminds me of I keep thinking of other books. That reminds me of Coldest Winter Ever, and how I remember reading that in like middle school and forgetting how old winter was, like, but those are like very, and I think in Coldest Winter Ever it was even more important her age because of the things she was dealing with. But it's always interesting to like rethink and kind of tap back in like how old your character is, because that really ends up serving the plot and the overall lesson.
For sure. Yeah, I think about that a bit in Song of Solomon, because especially in texts where you're kind of following them along for several years, so like the House of the Spirits, you're following them for generations. So you're not just thinking about changing historical contexts, right, in Peru, South America, but you're also thinking about how old are these people?
Right.
Like, I know she's a grandma, she's a what have you, but in Song of Solomon, I frequently forget Milkman's age, because there's so much happening with
I love that book, yeah.
With him just like feeling like he needs to, typical masculine-ish, he feels he needs to kind of exceed the father. He needs to take, pick up the torch, the man, what have you, and be a man, but also just kind of depending on the women in his life, all of those things. So I do think that age, perhaps in Black, I would say particular to Black literature, because again, working within the context of Black children age differently, right? That's a myth that gets imposed, right? That that person's 13, they should be tried as an adult. But also, we also reckon with the fact that because of this kind of feedback loop, children also do have to age differently for Black children. It's not acceptable to act like a child as a child.
You brought up Homecoming, one of the, who was that by? Yeah. I forget her last name, but Homecoming was another one that, like you were saying, like spans generations, and it was very tough to keep up with. Like, okay, so how old are you?
Right.
And then especially because a lot of that text followed like pivotal points throughout history, so it just kind of like went from like say like Reconstruction to another movement or another like social moment, and you just kind of got lost in how old the characters were. So. But that definitely has a very important point to it.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, wait. So Tanisha, am I bad at math? Is it is she 12?
I think she was saying 12 to when she had sex.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was like, dang, I was off. That changes the whole book. But yeah. So what were we talking about before? We stopped on age.
Keith and Lauren.
Oh, we're talking about Keith. Oh, sorry, what were you saying?
I said we were talking about Keith and Lauren's conversation, and
yeah, for sure. But while we're talking on the age thing, I do want to say, because one of the questions is what sort of pathways are available to young people like Keith and Lauren, and restating that question another way. For us as the readers to think more about what is the relationship to any sort of aspirations, any sort of future, right? So it's because it's not enough to say what pathways. I mean, you can probably identify some pathways, but if we're thinking about a society so unstable, so a civilization so rocked off of its function that it has a new adaptive function, And that ain't working out either. They're running out of acorn bread, or I don't know if they're running out of acorn bread, but like things are getting worse.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
your possibilities seem limited.
Yeah. So like it's not, because I think even now for some people, like any sort of a career trajectory seems irrational,
impossible,
Yeah, because it's like if you can't imagine, if the future that you had imagined for so long suddenly changed, therefore the where you saw yourself situated in the world also changes, right? But Lauren and Keith are largely groomed in a situation where these are their circumstances and have been, right? It's their parents who largely remember how it used to be. And there is, it's kind of like when our parents tell us something so much, we start to absorb kind of those memories as our own, mm-hmm. right? Like, mm-hmm. oh, I can taste the 80s. I can't. But I think, I do love the 80s, but I think for them, they hear, even if they don't know the previous world, mm-hmm. they feel the consequences of it, because especially with their parents' generation, they see like this huge, this longing for something else. It's kind of like in thinking about immigrant families, honestly, like thinking about, when I think about like my father being from the Caribbean and thinking about like his sense of like longing for home, I don't feel that longing because I've never been there, but I still feel the loss. I still can identify that there's loss there. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of takes a toll on you. It's not the same toll. It's a different experience altogether, but you still are able to understand or see loss.
Yeah.
You still experience a type of loss even without experiencing the material loss, mm-hmm. And so I think that they're in many ways experiencing something similar, where they might not have the very stark compare and contrast, mm-hmm. But they do have the sense of this is not what it was. And we get that from the very first chapter. Let me see. So yeah, that was my, but did you, I don't want to over talk, but just to,
I kind of chime in when I have something to say. You good?
Because I'm like that. I'll just like have a thought and then another thought and then another thought, and I'm like, you gotta sit down.
That's what's pulling out a lot of my thoughts too. So you good? It's all good. But yeah, I think just thinking about the limited options they have and then what the options are. It's a very bleak offering, mm-hmm. Not very promising. I mean, Lauren is like, if the only thing I can do is get married and have kids, I'll die. Mm-hmm. So
doesn't Lauren sound like so many of us? I did when I was just like a very.
That's all I got to look for. I would rather go. So, and then the other options, like the options that Keith is really grappling with, like, do I stay here and struggle, or do I try drugs and become addicted, or do I want to do some illegal things to earn money? Like, what didn't he steal some money? Then he steal like 1,000. So it's kind of like, damned if I do, damned if I don't. What is my option? Like, which way do I go?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a comment. Diana says, oh, this is in reference to the conversation on age. She says, we all age the same, yet stress and trauma forces Black children to act grown and Black adults to act childish.
I didn't see the last part. That is funny. It's true. No, I've seen that where people had to age so much faster, either because they, a number of different circumstances. And so then as like a 30-plus-year-old, adult, right?
Into those lost years.
It comes away in like a lack of emotional maturity.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, don't you got bills to pay? Or, don't you wanna
show up in like interpersonal relationships and just basic, social cues, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. So, because you kind of mentioned it earlier before, do you want to talk about some of the events that are happening and maybe shifting Lauren's world?
Say that again?
Oh, because I was saying, because you alluded to some of the events that happen in these sections, I want to say if you wanted to talk a little bit about the things that are changing for Lauren.
Yeah, Lauren, was it chapter 10 when Lauren is with was it Curtis? Is that his name?
I think that might be a little bit later.
Let's see. Oh wait, yeah. Oh, I kind of have like notes from the chapter, so I'm trying not to. I don't want to, because their chapter I think it's chapter 10 when there's the event with Keith, which kind of really sets the tone, I would say, for kind of like Lauren's grief. That's what I was saying earlier about how grief was I think that the entire novel has this element of grief to it, but you really see it kind of played up with Keith and their father in this section, but specifically with Keith in this chapter. So I don't want to say too. I don't like you said, I won't give it away, but like
no, it's fine. I was just being a turd earlier.
I tried to kind of steer away from spoilers because some people do tune in early, like before they read the section. But spoiler alert: Keith dies. And
I feel like I spoiled it in the discussion question because it was so unavoidable. I was like, I can't write any more questions.
Yeah. And what happens? But I think with one important thing here, relating back to what we were just talking about their past, is that his death and the way he dies really, I would say, like she Lauren not being sure about how he was getting his money and what he was doing. Like once he dies and the way he dies, she's like, okay, like, she has to. I don't think it was her. It was their father and Corey who had to go and identify his body. And this even affects Lauren. Obviously, it's her brother, but it affects her so much that she's been able to write for a couple days. But it really confirms her suspicions on her brother being involved in, this drug trafficking, drug trading, drug dealing situation. And he was so young, but he was really trying to, like, macho, big man, really like put on a show and portray to have this level of like maturity and awareness that, I think the brutality of the life he was involved in and caught up with him, and he wasn't prepared.
Yeah. I think it makes me wonder, how much as at this point in the text that we should start to be a little more critical of Lauren herself in kind of not denouncing, not maybe as strong as that, but that there's a sense of these pathways are impossible, right? That they're to have a child, to have, to be involved in not just illegal activity, but also, it's dangerous activity, it's, illicit drugs, things that are meant for like short-term satisfaction, as we understand it, right? And so here's Lauren, placing herself as, I see the long game, right? I envision like a longer future.
Mm-hmm.
And these are kind of set as oppositional to each other, right? And so we're left to be a little bit critical of, those people's choices. And I think that criticalness is so natural for us because we do that. And the idea of like there being like illegal trafficking or anything like that, it's just like, well, the state is distressed, right? Like you stick in the legal codes at this point, and then also conflating, legality with morals or morality, and so I think it's very easy to question, her friend Keith, because that's the kind of natural impulse that I think we have. But I think we are also offered time to grow more critical of Lauren and her relationship to people trying to find happiness, or success, or
Mm-hmm.
something to make them feel like they matter. And while she's offering a route for other people to feel like they matter, right? To relate them to the stars and the universe, that they are part of something bigger, of faith, right? They're seeking similar pleasures or like similar things that make them feel important, for Keith, it's power, masculinity. For her friend, blanking on the name, it's having a child. Yes, having a child. So yeah, I think, and Brie helped me to think about that last time, when she was like, we should think about the fact that it is a little naive for Lauren to just like denounce motherhood without considering why someone would want to be married and to have children, even in this, set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks, Brie, for that thought-provoking thought.
Yeah, that's that. Again, that reminds me of like all these social media conversations recently about having kids and not having kids being a flex. And I'm like, it's that's a good point. So I appreciate that too. That's an important perspective, because there are people who, especially in the current social climate that we're in, people are like, why would I bring kids into this world? But for other people, it's like, I want to start my family. I feel like it's important. And, both of those are valid.
Yeah. I feel like that social media conversation, it was like them $200 dates, or, I got my real estate at 19. I feel like those just come cyclical.
LLC at 19.
They just come all the time.
Yeah, it's just like there's no substance, there's no real like nuance and understanding in the conversations. It's just it's just BS. It's just a bunch of mindless chatter. But it's funny how every time we have these live chats, it's just, I like how there's always something happening in the moment that allows us to connect our reading to these conversations happening online or to the news. Even more so with this book, it's just very timely.
I remember, this is a massive side note, I remember watching Veep. Do you remember Veep? It was a show on HBO.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. And I remember avoiding it for rewatching it for so long because I was like, it's just too similar. But I found a lot of comfort in being like, oh, so people recognize that the government's always stupid. Okay, maybe there's hope. The fact that it could be like, ironic or whatever. But that was too close to home in like a very caucastic way, Veep, as funny as it was. But this hit hard.
Yeah.
Oh, it did. It really did.
Even I was like, the small details, like the president's name and the slogan. I was like, look, Miss Butler, rest in peace. Look, come on.
Is Butler being prophetic, and also the United States, Western modernity being so goddamn predictable?
Right. That part, but for me, it was the I think the president, what was it, like Donner?
It was definitely a D, and I was like, oh, take it away.
Girl, no. Like you say, certain things are predictable because it's a cycle, just like it's just the same shit keeps happening. But then like down to these little details. Like, did you
she knew something.
You knew where's third book?
She knew something.
Yeah. Like where do they help us?
Mm-hmm. And she can't even say she, didn't warn us because she did.
Yeah.
Priska said the summary of the book on Amazon spoils everything. I started the book already know what happened to the whole family. That's real. I don't actually mind if I know a book is good. I don't mind knowing what happens. Like Beloved, like you know what happens, but it's not about how what happens because we already know because it's based off historical events. It's about how you get there. And I could reread Beloved 1,000 times.
And I feel like a lot of people are reading this book in this moment because of that. Like they know that there are clear ties. I saw an article, I want to say New York Times, I might be wrong, but the title of it was something about like, why is Parable of the Sower being read so much more at this, like in this time?
Mm-hmm. For sure. She said, sis is definitely prophetic. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes, Tamara. Okay. So I think it's already 7. So we gonna move on to the next section.
You wanna go to like 14 and 19?
Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, so now we're in 2027. So if my math is correct, Lauren is now 18.
Okay.
Legally, she could do who cares because the government's on fire. So, but now, if nothing else, because I love to dissect the structure and the epigraphs. So 2027, right before chapter 14, we lose the title. So either that could mean that it's not an excerpt from Earthseed, it's something else. It's a preamble, a declaration, an other thing. But either way, it marks a shift in tone, audience, right? And that there's a shift or a progression between the section we just read and the parts that we're about to read. And so I will say, going back just a little bit, we get Lauren and her hesitations in sharing Earthseed with Curtis, right? So she has those anxieties when we're concluding that part 2 of the book. But ushering into part 3, those reservations are a little bit gone because you have such a firm declaration of we are Earthseed. So not only is it Lauren, right? It now extends beyond her. There is a we, right? So we go from like reservations, based off past experiences with, was it Joan or maybe I was watching Too Much Girlfriends. Joanne.
Yeah.
I have, it's the truth. And now we have a shift to we. So we are flesh, self-aware, questing, problem solving, flesh. We are that aspect of earth life best able to shape God knowingly. We are earth life maturing, earth life preparing to fall away from the parent world. Sure. It's not just the birth, but also I think the parent world is very interesting because we just talked about what's their relationship to the previous generation, and kind of, you saw the transition of worlds, and now in a post, right, or I'm in a different set of circumstances, but still contending with the previous. And so here she's saying Earth life preparing to fall away from the parent world. And so it's interesting to think about the parts that follow, the events that follow, that she kind of takes these words to heart. I mean, she wrote them or said them. So, but, and that she's literally falling away from a place of origin. And that is becoming of her progress, her liberation, her Earthseed. And I'll stop after this, but when she's saying Earth life fulfilling its purpose, its promise, its destiny, that again is an example of Butler, or rather Lauren with Earthseed, co-opting the language of white progress, civilization, intelligence, manifest destiny, that there is a destiny, a divine responsibility of whiteness, white Europeans, to bring civilization, education, things of this nature. And so to think about, in some ways, contending with what is our destiny away from this? Is the pursuit of, or, the destiny, manifest destiny justified the thing long before. But to conceive of a destiny that is counter to manifest destiny. And that gets reemphasized when you turn to the next page. It says, in order to rise from its own ashes, a phoenix must first burn. And I think that's not just thinking about the world, right? The world at large has to burn, but that maybe there's also an internal process of reconstitution of the self that has to take place in order to begin anew. And that might be the departure from your place of origin, from your people of origin, your parent world. Yeah. Oh, my roommate's leaving.
Gave him that look like.
This happened during my study group last night too. Being a mess. But yeah, what are your thoughts, not necessarily on the epigraph, but maybe on this section?
I'm like skimming my notes, trying to get my because there was another, because I think in the previous section, like going by your syllabus, keys to death, obviously, and then like that conversation right at the beginning were the two of the big things for me. And in this one, so, okay, are these supposed to be like pyro addicts, like these pyromaniacs, I guess? Are they like skinhead adjacent?
I don't know, but I feel like I wouldn't argue against that theory. But I think that's worth wondering about, because if we're thinking about the kind of thematics of this text, scorched earth is certainly part of it. So, and if we're thinking about ashes, the thing must burn in order to get the new thing. In many parts, we think we associate fire with destruction, yes, for good reasons. But to say that the pursuit of the destruction is against what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, again, another moment to interrogate us as the reader, our biases and allegiances to kind of illegal morality.
Yeah.
Because like burning stuff is wrong. And I think we've contended with this with, the rioting and looting language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so there is something maniacal about, like, them being addicted, pyromaniacs. But that doesn't mean it's totally irrational.
Yeah. This is somebody, I can't see the name, but it says, I agree, for a rebirth, something has to perish. And I think that's how I like to look at, like you were saying, the riots and the looting, because I, for one, don't really care if they're gonna riot and or loot. So I think it's a lot of the, like businesses and things that are burned down specifically, to shift the perception of those acts as something as I would say the entrance to a rebirth, which I guess is a conversation around liberation and how ultimately, like, all of this like must happen in order for Black people to really, for Black liberation to progress. It's just interesting to conceive of riots and looting, uprisings, as I would say, like, the awakening. I think it really shifts the narrative. I wish that was the popular narrative, is, this is all going away in order for a rebirth. But this neighborhood ultimately really is destroyed. A lot of people die.
Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit before about, in asking what is the kind of character evolution for Lauren. And so we have a lot of these extreme circumstances happen in the previous part, and she's witnessing death all around her, even into this year of 2027. And so a section that I bookmarked was her entry for July 31st, 2027.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't read the whole section, but I think the first, 2 paragraphs are really interesting, where she's talking about being so crazed with feeling, with emotion, that she literally doesn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so the last thing she's saying is, I have to write. There's nothing familiar left to me but the writing. God is change. I hate God. I have to write. And so I think from our cursory look or purview at this book, this is someone who has faith, right? And so she's kind of grappling with, God is change. I hate God. But she's drawing into this impulse to write.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I started to wonder.
Like her clarity.
Yeah, I was starting to wonder. Well, one, I was wondering what she was writing, because I know she the text breaks and then she keeps writing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, is it possible that she was writing Earthseed, right?
Yeah,
that in a moment, compelled by this great feel of, this isn't enough for me to then write Earthseed? That was just a question I had. But as you were mentioning before, a broader question just being, what does writing offer her in that moment?
Yeah, I think it's about the clarity, just being able to, because I have those moments for myself when there's like so much on my mind, whether it's, you know, a moment of stress or just trying to figure out what I'm gonna do for the day, is I have to write, you know. I have to sit down and really just allow my thoughts to flow naturally onto paper, whatever they may be, but especially in those moments of stress and yeah, you know, just being stressed and upset and confused. Lauren specifically, this is how she's trying to kind of regain control of her thoughts. Like, God has changed. I hate God. It's like you said, it's completely different from who we met before. Now this person is struggling with, you know, identity, faith. So she's writing in hopes of being able to grasp that faith again, or just that control again.
Yeah. And so, you know, then we get to more of just death and destruction for Lauren.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think one question I'll highlight here from the discussion is Lauren is reminded of Keith's remark about the burn the rich movement upon seeing a scavenger woman with Corey's shoes. How is Lauren's scorn for the addicts and the desperate compared to her earlier sentiments about survival in the neighborhood? And I think that gets to an earlier question asked about when you asked about, you know, the pyromaniacs or addicts, and just kind of assembling all of these activities, the scavenging, the looting, rioting, the burning, how Lauren perceives those activities. Do you think that there's a shift in her regard of those things? And I'll also include in that motherhood and partnership. And I don't just mean in these two parts. This maybe is an open-ended question that maybe doesn't get answered till the last live discussion. But to ask, what is Lauren's relationship or regard to those activities as deterrence from what she believes is maybe a broader goal? How does that stay the same, evolve, kind of throughout the text, maybe?
You know, so there's the part where I think she has a gun.
Yes.
She sees some guys that remind her of her brother, is that her brother or is that her friend? Keith. And you know, she has this moment where she's like, okay, like I gotta watch out for them because I know what Keith was involved in. So I know that they're a threat. But she's grappling with the love that she had for Keith, and I guess you could, you know, the hatred that she had for what he was involved in. So I don't necessarily think her understanding or her distrust for those activities in particular has changed yet. His death is still fresh. Maybe she will develop some type of understanding by the time we get to the end of the text, but she knows at this moment that these are the same dudes or type of dudes that Keith was hanging with, and look at how he died. So they are, you know, not to be confused with the Keith that I loved.
Yeah.
If that answers your question.
Yeah.
The motherhood part, we'll see. Because we haven't.
No. Well, a little bit towards the end of this section,
okay.
But because when she's reading about Sahara, like when she's doing her hyperempathy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we can transition to, Lauren's small group, her survival group, if I will.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, before I did just want to highlight the part that discussion question comes from. So it says, she died for us, the scavenger woman had said of the green face. Some kind of insane burn the rich movement, Keith had said. We've never been rich, but to the desperate, we look rich. We were surviving and we had our wall. Did our community die so that addicts could make a help the poor political statement? And I think that section, and that's on page 163 of the version I have. But I think that kind of accentuates the tension that I was, hopefully describing of just, Lauren's faith movement isn't devoid of any political statement, right? And so, again, where's the kind of criticalness of, what these people are doing aren't grand deviations from perhaps what my intentions are, right? Let's say that they're the same, because we can always complicate either. But just to say that, for us reading Lauren, and reading a character development through this art, that there's a refusal of a type of criticalness of what these smaller activities, what these crimes might mean.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So we got I'm gonna say Zahara.
I think it's Zara.
Is Zara? Okay. I'm so sorry. So sorry to Zara. But we have Zara and Harry, right?
Uh-huh.
So they're kind of a little survival crew that starts. It's kind of the very tiny phoenix dusting off the ashes, kind of like in Harry Potter. Okay, so I feel like because even though we are focusing on Lauren the individual, her circle is just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But then she has this new nascent, is that the word I was looking for? She has this new baby group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I put a lot of comparisons between Harry, Zara, and Lauren, because I think that their interactions with each other really emphasizes how they each relate to things very differently, right? So one of those things being, the reactions to death, their upbringings, ideas of survival and morality.
Yeah, Zara is very much like nobody's safe. Trust nobody. Like at that point when she has to remind them that like even children are not to be trusted. They'll rob you too. I did it. So and then Harry, I don't like Harry. I don't think I liked Harry.
I feel like he was super abrasive, like when he was like talking to her. I don't remember.
Yeah, even Lauren's like, does he need to get left home?
Right. But yeah, I think.
And Harry's also kind of checking Zara out, and Lauren is like, you
gonna mess up the survival of the group.
Like, dude, it's not that bad. Do you see all of a sudden just burn down and you over here catching feelings? Not right now.
We got goals. But again, if we take on this idea of, I'm going to assemble together a couple of ideas that we've discussed so far, and that also with Bray last week. So if we consider age in this text, right, the idea that people's age gets accelerated, and, you know, also contending with maybe a lack of maturity and an elevated sense of maturity. And also last week we were thinking about the possibility that Lauren's hyperempathy maybe is not something exceptional at all. And it's just that everyone else has become, again, this adaptive function, everyone else has become accustomed to just being tuned out of how everyone else is doing. And that, you know, Lauren is just experiencing empathy in excess. And Bree had pointed out, you know, something to where Black women feel, you know, socially, you know, in their families, a sense of excess of empathy for everyone else. And I think Bree said it very, very beautifully of what does it mean for Octavia Butler to craft this narrative where the most debilitating or dangerous threat to this Black woman trying to do great things is her hyperempathy. And to that point, if to think along those lines, I'm wondering about Lauren's impulse to refuse intimacy, refuse partnership, refuse the idea of a child, refuse the idea that, you know, these other little vices and pleasures that people experience along this way can't exist within this project that she's trying to move forward, Earthseed. Then perhaps if we extend the earlier remarks about the dangers of empathy and excess for Black women who overextend themselves, that perhaps there's also a cautionary lens about refusing partnership, intimacy, emotions, pleasures, contentedness for the sake of.
Essentially, Lauren's like, I have no more to give. Like, I have nothing to give. You got it all. No kids, no partner. It's already, I have nothing else. I'm empty.
Yeah. But when she talks about it, it's kind of wrapped up in kind of a pragmatic argument of it's just not fiscally responsible. It's just not reasonable. It's just not ethical, right? But it could come down to the limits of Lauren herself, you know? So that was a thought. It was a tangent. It was a journey to get there, but I appreciate you being patient with me. Okay.
It's like a question or two because I don't want to have people on. Well, there were people dropping off, but I think to pick them back up. But pick like somewhere to kind of tie.
Yeah. So I think we kind of did the overview of we talked about how Lauren, Zara, and Harry just have these differences, and those kind of illuminate, you know, important characterizations for each of them. And so there's this quickly do this thing on privacy. So Lauren, what is she able to detect with hyperempathy? Does anyone in the comments remember?
What did you say?
I said, what does Lauren detect? Is it is it what you just talked about?
Hold on a second. Let me.
Yeah, to Coca, I'm just agreeing about the detaching for the sake of survival. What is it called? Damn it. Not to be Freud, but there's like a psychological psychosis. It reminds me of hearing a lot about that in school.
What you're referring to, but the part where she hears the gunshots and she kind of feels like something's going on, and I think there are like people and gunshots in the distance, and she goes to sleep. She falls asleep, but then basically like this body falls on her or next to her or something.
I think I was referring to the part that you talked about earlier. It was like detecting sexual tension.
Oh, okay.
And I think Lauren after that feels guilty about it because she's like, oh, trust. Y'all can't trust me when I know what's going on in every which way. I'm pretty sure that's this might. Oh, maybe it was. Either way, it's in the area of page 176 and 178. I ain't got time to be quiet on here and try to look for it, but I'm pretty sure you're right.
I like the part also. It shows a different Lauren when she has to, she feels like she has to kill, and Harry and Zara are kind of like, oh.
So you cuckoo.
That's what we do. And they're like, what is it? Harry's like, I wouldn't have done that. She's like, I didn't ask you to. Like, I did it. She has them like take the clothes. She's like strip them and take anything that could be like useful or helpful, blah blah blah. But I think she worries that they don't trust her after that, and she's very concerned about whether or not they would want to continue with her. So she starts to try to like relate to them using this her hyper empathetic self, and I think she talks about like her mother, but Harry's still like, nah, you're a killer.
Okay, that makes sense. Yes. Let's see. Was there? Maybe we can do 2 more questions, or I'll maybe ask how would you, if any, compare or contrast Earthseed to any other kind of like common faith or traditions or systems? And maybe not just for you, but maybe how we see Lauren distinguishing between Earthseed and other religions.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Is it really different? That's a question for the community as well. Not
yes, it is.
I'm thinking.
It is open to folks in the comments.
I think in a lot of ways she is like trying to make it so different from what she's known that it's almost starting to take on a lot of similarities. It doesn't seem, too different from other. I mean, it is different, obviously, but I think it's definitely was it meant to be kind of like community based in a way. I whenever I think of Earthseed, I think of a community element because of the way we are Earthseed kind of, because it's like it's a faith, but it's almost like it's a political group.
I would definitely agree with that distinction of its emphasis on the individual's capacity, like not the individual, but a person's capacity, and then extending that to the power of a collective. So it's not so much about the work of the individual, but to say that you as a person have a deeper connection to that broader being nature, that broader being history, that broader being the group to which you associate and belong. And that obviously conflicts a little or counters in some ways monotheism, which your conviction is not necessarily in yourself, but in yourself in relation to a higher person. So yeah. And I think what you're saying about it having a political angle is certainly correct, especially in that its politic is a faith in the individual and its collective, right? That has like a very political connotation, right? Or a politically activating connotation, right? And I think that brings us to ask how kind of what you were saying about, in trying to defy one thing, we kind of recapitulate the thing that we're trying to move away from. And I think that it's interesting to think, before I finish this thought, I'll just read the comment by Anikon. I'm so sorry, dear. I'm bad at reading. Earthseed is based on change. I think this allows her to not be rigid in her ideas of God and how God works. She's trying to figure it out, and this gives her flexibility. The only constant in Earthseed is change, whereas most religions have concrete ideas of what God is and do not allow new ideas. Yeah, totally. And I think to your point, Morgan, about it being political or having being politically activating, I think it's kind of like, Baptist Christian faith having its hands in being politically activating for Black liberation in a U.S. context, right? Even though it wasn't intended as such, it was intended for other political reasons in Western Europe, but political reasons that didn't have anything to do with Black people, and if anything, were used to justify slavery, enslavement of Black people. So to not be intended as such, but to become this, politically and spiritually activating project for Black liberation in the U.S., and then for kind of an inverse of those circumstances, for Lauren to be in this very high stress situation and to produce a faith that is that is born of political turmoil, and then extends into a new political possibility, whether she intended as such or not. So I think there's kind of an inversion of intentions and consequences but Octavia Butler's still threading along faith as being almost intrinsic to Black liberation, which, as we discussed last week when Bree was saying, that makes sense because you're grappling with systems, and that feels hopeless, feels fruitless. And so it requires some level of faith, some discipline of faith. So yeah, I don't know if there are any other questions or thoughts, but I'm kind of comfortable leaving it at that. Is it good?
I'm good. Do we have any more comments?
Yeah. Are there any? final thoughts, comments? It is Sunday, so
Right. If not, CJ, it's been real.
Yes, it has. Thank you everyone for participating, contributing your thoughts, or just stopping by, showing some love. We appreciate it. You can still check out the syllabus for Parable of the Sower. Available at the smartbrowngirl.com. Is it with an S? With that S? Smart Brown Girls. That makes sense. Plurality, right? But if it's not, it's not
plural.
If you get E4, it's not plural?
No, it's not.
Okay, because we are Earthseed. We are Smart Brown Girls, so you don't need the plural. Exactly.
There you go.
Julesy, we got you. Okay? All right. Bye. Oh. I couldn't believe in a God in the traditional sense. It was angering me, and I felt abandoned by him. In order for me to make some sense of everything around me, I had to leave myself open to the fact that God isn't a monolith, and he's more than what the church says. Amen, Coco.
I thought Lauren Holloman wrote that. Okay, come on.
Right. I thought that was an excerpt. Thank you, Coco. Thank you for sharing. All right, everyone.
Okay,
we'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.